What's up, guys? We're back with NCAA basketball picks for Tuesday, March 19th. We went 4-1 on Championship Sunday with Temple as our only letdown. Let's hope we can keep it rolling today. The NCAA tournament kind of starts up this evening. Let's jump into some games. Smash the thumbs up button if you want to see our picks every day, and subscribe to the channel. Look at this, almost 80% of viewers aren't subscribed. It's 100% free and can keep you from missing out on these picks. These videos are sponsored by StumpTheSpread.com. Click the link in the description to get over there and join our free email list and check out our top confidence plays on all the major sports. Stump the Spread is sponsoring a bracket challenge on ESPN.com. The link is down in the description. Get over there and let's see how your picks stack up against the experts. Comment below with your bets today and anything else you want to say about these picks, these videos, or anything you see here. I respond to every single comment and I'll give you my best advice on your picks to help us all cash some bets. Now let's dive into our first game of the day, Wagner against Howard in the West Conference First Four. The Wagner Seahawks did not really have an amazing season. They finished things up 16-15 overall, but they caught fire at the right time to win the NEC tournament. They got the upset win in the championship game against Merrimack. This squad has been kind of a weird one. They play a lot of defense. They're not a high-paced team. They do crash the boards pretty well. Their offense is nothing to write home about, though. Their leading scorer, Melvin Council Jr., is not a monster necessarily. He's scoring 15 points per game, which in a slow-paced system, I guess isn't terrible, but he's only shooting 38% from the field. Not exactly right home about kind of numbers. This team has not found a lot of success in step-up games. They got smashed by Seton Hall, Providence, teams like that. I don't think they're really ready to run with the big dogs. This isn't that kind of team, and really, if you're thinking about it, the NEC isn't actually that kind of conference. Luckily for them, in this game, though, they're not really dealing with a step-up situation. They're going against the Howard Bison, who won the MEAC. They knocked off some very solid opponents. They knocked out Norfolk State, who's the best team there in the regular season by pretty big margin. Howard can really play some offense. They're a strong offensive team that struggles on defense a little bit. It's going to be kind of a pace mismatch in this game. It'll be interesting to see which team can impose their pace of play on the game. I kind of think it should be Howard in this one. They're going to have the best player on the floor by a large margin in Bryce Harris. He's an absolute monster. Seth Towns is a monster also. He's dishing out 3 assists to go along with around 15 points per game. This team can rebound the ball a little bit. I think they're maybe not quite as good of a rebounding team as Howard, but they definitely are going to have a talent gap. They're going to have an athleticism gap. They're going to be the better team by a significant margin. Howard was only 12-18-2 against the spread overall this season, so those are pretty poor numbers. Wagner wasn't great against the spread either, though, going only 14-15 against the spread. I think we're going to take Howard -3.5, and this one is our first pick of the day. I think they find a way to get the job done here against a Wagner team that doesn't really have the pace or the athleticism to keep up. Next up, we're looking at a much more interesting game. We're looking at the Midwest region First Four in. We've got Colorado State going up against Virginia. Colorado State comes into this game. They have to be a little bit annoyed that this is where they ended up after having a pretty decent season in the Mountain West and being ranked in the top 25 a few times, but I guess they're probably just happy to make it into the NCAA tournament. There's a lot of weirdness on Selection Sunday, so as long as they're in the field, they should be at least kind of happy. The Rams have been a very strong team over the course of the season. The Mountain West is still seeming pretty underrated by the odds makers and by the selection committee in general. Colorado State is a very solid offensive team. They play good defense. They can struggle a little bit on the boards. That's something of a concern, but they run a very well-oiled machine here on offense, led by Isaiah Stevens. He's putting up almost 17 points and 7 assists per game while shooting nearly 50% from the field. He is an absolute monster. This team has had all kinds of success this season against very good opponents. They looked great playing their non-conference schedule with wins over Boston College, Creighton, Colorado, Washington. They did lose to St. Mary's, but St. Mary's is a very good team. They've also played their way through an extremely tough conference. When we're looking at Virginia, on the other hand, the ACC, I think, is a very overrated conference, so they didn't have that tough of a conference schedule. This Virginia team is one of the most annoying ones out there. They're that offense last by far, and defense first and all the time kind of squad. They're averaging only 63 points per game. This is some boring stuff here, guys. Their defense is amazing. They're suffocating opponents. That's their whole gig, but they got worked by NC State. They did manage to beat Boston College. They got absolutely destroyed by Duke. They lost to UNC by 10. This team is not an elite squad. They're just a defense first, play a super slow pace, try and grind it out. If they're down by 5 to 8 points at any point in the game, you kind of feel like it's just over for them because they're so limited on what they're allowed to do on offense. We're going to take Colorado State -1.5. Their offense is going to overpower this annoying Virginia defense. We see the Rams getting the job done. This is going to be one of our favorite bets of the day. Next up, we're switching over to the NIT. We're looking at North Texas taking on LSU. North Texas comes into this game. They didn't have a great record overall this season. They were only 18-14, but they played played their way through a very tough American Conference schedule. Their last time out, they lost against FAU 77-71 in a tough game. This squad has been kind of a defense first team, but their defense is very, very good, and they do try and play some offense. They have a very solid leading scorer in Jason Edwards, who's scoring nearly 20 points per game. CJ Noland is their point guard. He's only putting up 2 assists per game, though. Not that much of a point guard, but he's scored in double figures on average, so that's pretty solid. North Texas has been amazing against the spread overall this season. They're 18-12 against the spread and 7-3 against the spread when playing on the road. They could have their hands full here, though, going against an SEC opponent, but when your SEC opponent is LSU, that can kind of make you feel a little bit better. The Tigers have not had a good time this season at all. They finished this year only 17-15. Their rebounding numbers are not great. Their defense isn't very good. Their leading scorer, Jordan Wright, is not exactly someone I would describe as a monster. He's shooting only 37% from the field in general. This squad they just haven't found a way in the SEC. The SEC is a pretty tough conference, don't get me wrong, but they've dropped 3 of their last 6 overall. Their wins came by 1 point against Georgia, a solid win at Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt's not a very good team, and then barely managed to edge out lowly Mizzou, before getting beaten by Mississippi State by 10 points. I don't know, guys. LSU just doesn't really get me going. I don't think they're a very good team. They're only 13-19 against the spread this season overall, and they're only 6-11 against the spread at home. Those are terrible numbers. We are going to take North Texas. They're going to care way more about this game. They're getting 2.5 points. LSU probably had their sights set on the NCAA tournament for this season, and they definitely didn't achieve that goal, so I don't think they're going to be that motivated here in the NIT. Give me North Texas and the points in this one. Next up, staying in the NIT, we've got Xavier going up against Georgia. Xavier comes into this game fresh off a blowout loss against UConn. That's not really an embarrassing loss, but when you look at Xavier finishing the season only 16-17 overall and 9-11 in the pretty weak Big East, they just really haven't had the season they thought they would. Quincy Oliveri is a solid scorer. He's putting up 19 points per game, but somebody has to score the points for this team, right? Their offense in general, not really anything to write home about given the conference they were in. They are a solid rebounding team. Their assist numbers are pretty good, but their defense doesn't exactly get me really excited. This squad has not had success against the better teams. Their wins have come against mostly teams like Georgetown, DePaul, St. John's when St. John's was having such a hard time. They did have a win against Providence, which I guess is a fairly solid win, but in their non-conference, they had an upset over Cincinnati. They played Houston close very early in the season, but they lost to Oakland. They lost to Washington. They got blown out by Purdue. Their non-conference doesn't really get me going either. Xavier just really hasn't been that great of a team. In this one, though, they've got an interesting matchup. They're taking on the Georgia Bulldogs, which were kind of the Xavier of the SEC. Georgia finished their conference schedule only 6-12 and only 17-16 overall in the season. Those are not great numbers. They don't have a very good leading scorer. Noah Tomlinson is not a monster. He's scoring only 12 points per game. This team struggles on the boards. Their defense isn't very good. They also have only found success against the bad teams. They won by only 5 points over Mizzou recently. They did beat Ole Miss, but Ole Miss has not closed out the season well at all. They beat Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt's an absolute train wreck at this point. Their wins have came few and far between. They just have not had a good year. In their non-conference schedule, they didn't have a very good time either. This just has been a tough year for Georgia in general. The Bulldogs are only 18-14 against the spread overall this season, but more importantly in this game, they're 7-10-1 against the spread playing at home. Xavier is 5-6 against the spread on the road, not a bad number, and they're getting 1.5 points in this one. I think Xavier is the better offensive team overall, and I think they're going to care a little bit more about this game. I don't know, it's hard to gauge these teams' interests in the NIT, but we're definitely taking Xavier plus 1.5 in this game. Next up, we're looking at Cornell going against Ohio State. Cornell comes into this game. They have to be pretty disappointed. This is not the way they thought this season was going to end. This team definitely thought they had what it took to win the Ivy League and get into the tournament. We also thought there was some chance that the Ivy League would get more than one school into the NCAA tournament, but that's not really what the selection committee seemed to think. Their last time out, Cornell lost pretty decisively to Yale. They've got to be kind of disappointed coming into this game, especially with how good their numbers have been all season long. Cornell is one of the top offensive teams in the nation, putting up over 80 points per game. Their defense is pretty good, but not amazing. They're good on the boards, but not incredible. They don't have tons of length and athleticism, so this could definitely be a little bit of a mismatch in Ohio State's favor. The Buckeyes come into this game. They have to be very disappointed. They didn't make it into the NCAA tournament. They came up only 3 points short against Illinois in the Big Ten tournament. Bruce Thornton is their leading scorer. He's a monster. He's putting up some solid numbers. They come into this game not the best rebounding team either, so that gives us a little bit of hope for Cornell that maybe they could hang with them on the boards, at least somewhat. Their defense is not very good. The Ohio State defense hasn't been amazing. Their overall offensive production doesn't exactly get me excited either. This team probably wasn't quite good enough to get into the tournament. They did make a run, though, at the end of the year that probably had them with a lot of hope. I mean, they won 5 straight before losing against number 13 Illinois. That's not exactly a bad loss there, so they're probably pretty crushed. I think Ohio State thought they were going to make the tournament. They're only 7-9-1 against the spread at home. This one's a little bit tough to gauge, but we are looking at Cornell. We're taking Cornell and the points in this one. I think they find a way to at least keep things close against an Ohio State team that I think is going to be very, very disappointed that they didn't make it into the NCAA tournament. I don't think they're going to be playing with the most effort in this game. Maybe they find a way to turn it on late and they get this win, but I think it'll be very close. And we have the history of Ivy League teams doing well in the tournaments. So give me Cornell plus 12.5. That's just way too many points for me. Next up, we're looking at one of the biggest snubs in the NCAA season so far. We've got South Florida going up against UCF. South Florida was the best team in the American Conference all season long. They did stumble and lose against UAB, and they didn't have a great time at the end of their season, losing 2 of 3 overall. That loss at Tulsa definitely hurt them a decent amount with the odds makers, with the selection committee, but man, they surely feel like a team that deserved to be in the field to me. South Florida is an elite defensive team. They've got a lot of very solid scoring options. Chris Youngblood is their leading scorer with 15 points per game. This squad can rebound the ball. They play solid offense. They play solid defense. You know they were really counting on getting an NCAA tournament bid, and now that they didn't, I think coming from a smaller conference, coming from the American, I think they're going to just be pretty pissed off. They're going up against UCF, a team that did not exactly kill it this year. UCF was a tough team in the Big 12. You didn't really want to have to go on the road and play at UCF this season in general. The odds makers didn't give them very much respect, though. They did hang tight against some elite opponents, but here at the end of the year, they got kind of destroyed by BYU. They got beaten by Houston, Iowa State, teams like that. I think South Florida is going to be pretty pissed off in this game, like I said. How does Central Florida feel about the fact that they're playing in the NIT in their first season after going to the Big 12? I'm not really sure here. UCF is a solid rebounding team. They play some defense, but I think their offensive production is going to be a little bit lower than what you expect to see from South Florida. UCF has been great against the spread at home. They're -5 in this one, so they're getting the respect from the odds makers in this one. But South Florida has been amazing against the spread over the course of the season, going 28-3 against the spread over the course of the year, and they're 5-4-2 against the spread on the road. Give me South Florida and the points in this one. I think they find a way to get the job done here. I don't know if they win this game outright, so I wouldn't exactly be sprinkling the money line, but I think it deserves some consideration. And second thought, I think I will be sprinkling a little bit of the money line on this one and taking the points with South Florida. Next up, we're looking at UC Irvine going up against Utah. UC Irvine comes into this game. The Anteaters had a very good season. They dominated the Big West, but they lost their conference tournament to Long Beach State, denying themselves of that NCAA tournament berth. The Big West is not exactly a power conference right now, so this wouldn't have been a team that we expected to advance in the NCAA tournament. Can we expect them to advance here in the NIT? Justin Hahn is their leading scorer, not exactly putting up cartoon numbers. Pierre Coctrell is their leading assist guy. He's a pretty solid point guard, but he doesn't really score the ball too much. This team in general does score the ball well, though, and they rebound relatively well. They like to play at a slightly higher pace. Their defense is pretty decent, but you have to take into account the teams they've been facing this season. They didn't have a ton of success in their non-conference schedule, but they did play some opponents pretty close. They had a very close game against San Diego State. They had a pretty competitive game against Utah State. They played well against Duquesne, but those weren't games that they were able to come away with wins. Looking at Utah, they were very up and down this season. They started things off pretty well, but faded quickly, and they faded down the stretch here in the conference tournament, losing to Colorado in a blowout. Utah is a very solid offensive team. The Pac-12 is kind of a mixed bag this season. It's hard to tell how they're really going to stack up against the other conferences. Brandon Carlson is a monster leading scorer. We see Gabe Madsen, who's a very good point guard. This team can rebound the ball really well. Their defense lacks a little bit of intensity, though. They're allowing 72.6 points per game, and they just allowed 72 points to Colorado in a game where they got blown out. UC Irvine has been a very good team against the spread all season, going 19-13-1 against the spread overall, but Utah is a very good 10-6 against the spread at home, but UC Irvine is 10-6 against the spread playing on the road this season. I think give me UC Irvine. We're going to take those early non-conference games into account where they played their opponents pretty tough. I think UC Irvine is going to at least care about this game a little bit, enough that they're going to keep things close. Maybe Utah comes away with the win in the end. This won't be one of my bigger bets of the day, but definitely give me UC Irvine +7. Last but not least, we're looking at Richmond going up against Virginia Tech. Richmond comes into this game game fresh off of 2 losses. They lost at George Mason, and then they lost to St. Joseph's to end their season. Very disappointing finish for the Spiders, who finished atop the A10 conference, a very tough and interesting conference that got very weird love from the selection committee, it feels like to me. Richmond went 21-10 and 1 against the spread overall this season, which isn't surprising behind the stellar play of Jordan King, who's putting up 18 points per game on 45% shooting from the field. Neil Quinn was a very solid point guard. This team struggles on the boards. There's no way around it. They're just not a very good rebounding team. Their offense is decent. Their defense is very, very good, but they are not peaking here at the right time. And they have to be pretty disappointed that they didn't make the NCAA tournament, given that they have to look at teams well below them in the conference standings that will be playing in the big dance. Virginia Tech comes into this game fresh off of a tough loss against Florida State. They finished the season out relatively strong with 3 straight wins before crashing out of their conference tournament. Virginia Tech is probably a squad that thought they were going to have a chance to be in the big dance coming into the season. Sean Padula is their leading scorer. He's pretty decent, but it seems like he can struggle against some of the better, longer, athletic opponents. And Richmond does have some guys to run at him, so it'll be interesting to see how he performs here in a very tough tournament environment. Virginia Tech is not a good rebounding team at all. They really struggle on the board, so it'll be interesting to see which one of these teams comes away with the rebounding edge, since neither one of them are very good on the glass. Virginia Tech's been very good against the spread playing at home this season. I think they're going to care a little bit more about this game. I think they have a better matchup, but I'm going to go with Richmond and the points in this one. They should care the most about this NIT game, and they should be out for some vengeance and to prove that they deserve to be in the field overall. Give me Richmond plus 5.5. That's all of our games for today, guys. Hit that like button for good luck on all your bets, and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Check out our tournament challenge below. There's a link in the description. Let me know in the comments any questions you have on today's slate or anything else you see here. Thanks for watching. You can click the link in the description, check out stumpthespread.com, and we'll see you guys tomorrow for more NCAA basketball action.